Okay. um, 18 October, this and that. Today I'm just going to review a few, and I haven't read all these books, and God knows well, perhaps I'll get to all of them eventually. I've gotten to some core books, foundational books, and that's probably as much as I've gotten so far, but there are other things to worry about. Half the battle for people who teach is that, part of it is simply forcing oneself to do it by teaching a course on it, which, as I've said, um, I would assume that Bellamy Foster's book was probably designed for some kind of sociology of science course thing to accompany his original text. Anyway, so I found this list by Andreas Malm, which I think is a very good list, and it's pretty comprehensive. So those who want to get a sense of the Marxist approach to ecology and might find some of these readings useful. So I'll make a few comments as we go through here, but I'm just going through the list and then I'll stop and then we can get back to other things. Ecology and Marxism. Many people on the left, myself included, were for a long time in the habit of shrugging off issues of ecology as secondary matters, peripheral to the real struggle. Indifference or lukewarm commitment to environmentalism sometimes still characterizes Marxist intellectuals. Consult, for instance, the last 100 or so issues of the Left Review. Thankfully, hopefully, however, many have experienced the materialist epiphany and realized that literally everything is at stake in the ecological crisis. There are lots of books for the general reader to stimulate such insights and jolt her into a state of shock, fear, desperation, and anger. It's my favorite law term, at what's happening on this planet. But this reading guide does not list them. Rather, it presupposes an interest in matters of the earth. For Marxists and other socialists with a newfound ecological curiosity, however, a good starting point is some recent literature that spells out with brilliant clarity and popular appeal the basic contradiction between capitalism and sustainability. I have the two following titles foremost in mind. Hopefully everyone's kind of gotten to this one, but there is a Naomi Klein book. This Changes Everything, Capitalism and the Climate. This tome deserves its status as the Bible of the radical climate movement and a basic reference point in eco-socialist debates. Mandatory reading. And perhaps we will actually plow through that soon. And Ashley Dawson's Extinction, A Radical History from 2016. This short essay very effectively surveys the biodiversity crisis, arguably the only aspect of the ecological crisis that can match climate change in severity and magnitude, and identifies capitalism as the culprit. Number two, Marx and Ecology. So, did Karl Marx himself have any insights into problems of environmental degradation? Turns out he did. Research over the past 2 decades has reconstructed a highly significant strand of ecological thinking in the oeuvre of Marx and Engels, surprisingly useful for understanding our contemporary predicament. Analysis of ecological destructivity of capitalism can gain massively from engagement with the founding fathers. The two classics in the field of eco-Marxology, dense with quotations but analytically clear and relatively easy to follow, are what we plowed through last year, I guess. John Bellamy Foster's Marx's Ecology, Materialism, and Nature of 2000, and Paul Burkett, Marx and Nature, A Red and Green Perspective, originally published in 1999, long before Foster and Burkett. A precocious, striking study of Marx's view of nature was written by Alfred Schmidt in The Concept of Nature in Marx, which was originally came out in 1962. Now, together with their colleagues, we have the Metabolic Rift School. The above-mentioned Foster and Burkett have become the leading proponents of the metabolic rift school of ecological Marxism. Building on this concept from Marx, they argue that many environmental problems can be best understood as the result of ecological cycles and webs being torn apart by capital accumulation, which is itself based on a primordial separation or rift, namely that between the direct producers and the means of production. The social rift leads to multiplying ecological rifts, and some key titles are Foster, Clark, and York, The Ecological Rift, Capitalism's War on the Earth of 2010, wide-ranging collection of articles that brings out the power of metabolic rift theory. But beware of repetitive restatements of the core arguments. Well, that's, repetition counts, I suppose. Paul Burkett's Marxism and Ecological Economics Toward a Red and Green Political Economy on Haymarket, 2006, revised or paperback, I think, 2009. Drawing on his previous work, Burkett here contrasts Marxism to more mainstream approaches in ecological economics. A sophisticated but occasionally somewhat technical work. There is an entire field of ecological economics, so lest you think this is all operating in isolation, there's constant interaction among the fields, some of which have moved closer to a kind of rift position. Stefano Longo, Rebecca Clausen, and Brett Clark, The Tragedy of the Commodity, Oceans, Fisheries, and Aquaculture, an excellent empirical case study demonstrating the utility of the metabolic rift theory for explaining ecological crises. In this case, the catastrophic decline in fish stocks around the world. And then John Bellamy Foster and Paul Burkett's Marx and the Earth, 2017. This book represents perhaps the highest stage of eco-Marxology, in that it goes to extraordinary length to defend Marx as a green prophet against anyone who has criticized him, and by extension, Foster and Burkett, for lacunae or blind spots, that is, things that are missing, gaps. For the reader with a very strong interest in the details of Marx's environmental thinking, who can put up with occasional deification of the father, indeed. And yes, there is that discourse. Earlier ecological Marxism engaged with ecology long before the present millennium. The new left of the 1960s and 70s had to relate to the emerging green movement and revisit its political agenda in the light of the environmental issues of their day, and this encounter generated some work that's still of great value. For example, Ted Benton's The Greening of Marxism of 1996, classical texts, pioneer, it includes Aaron Gare's quite sensational essay on the pioneering ecological initiatives in Bolshevik Russia prior to the Stalinist takeover, as well as several articles on the relation between Marxism and Malthusian environmental thinking focused on natural limits. Don't miss this path-breaking text by Ted Benton and early pieces on red-tinted ecofeminism. James O'Connor, really a master text, Natural Causes, Essays in Ecological Marxism. The first generation was much influenced by James O'Connor's theory of the second contradiction of capitalism. It says, in short, that capital has a tendency to produce crises not only through the mechanisms long studied by Marx and his followers, but also through the tendency to damage and destroy ecosystems. Since these are the foundations of all economic activities, capital thereby undermines its own basis and induces a fall in the rate of profit. This is the classical position. The theory fell out of favor with the rise of the metabolic rift school. That is, see the critique of it in Foster's The Ecological Revolution, chapter 10, but it remains a key moment in the development of ecological Marxism and has recently been resuscitated by Jason W. Moore at Binghamton, SUNY Binghamton. One of the central texts on the theory of the second contradiction are included in Greening Marxism. This book is for the reader interested in learning more about the perspectives of O'Connor. Now, there is a world ecology school, and that sort of fits into kind of the Wallerstein sort of thing. In 2017, debates on ecological Marxism to a great extent revolve around the figure of Jason W. Moore, seeking to overturn the metabolic rift paradigm, of which he is fiercely critical. He has developed world ecology as an alternative approach. He claims that it overcomes the Cartesian dualism of earlier eco-Marxist theory and better integrates nature in the operations of capital as a whole. Hugely controversial, hardly an easy read, is Capitalism in the Web of Life is a book that red-green intellectuals, but perhaps not so much activists, need to have a position on. The ensuing debate can fairly easily be followed by some Googling. The argument is essentially one accusing, sort of a bad logic on both parts. So one is a straw argument, needless to say. Feminism and ecology. Not only capitalism is implicated in ecological destruction, so is patriarchy. This realization animates ecofeminism, which has produced some work that is also aligned to Marxism, although much more needs to be done in this sphere. One classic of this current, which also stands as one of the best books of radical environmental history ever written, is Carolyn Merchant's The Death of Nature, Women, Ecology, and the Scientific Revolution of 1980. A stunning materialist analysis of ideas. It shows how aggressively dominating attitudes towards nature and women grew out of the capitalist property relations that first took hold in England. Other prominent ecofeminists with varying degrees of Marxist commitment are Val Plumwood and Ariel Sala. See also sober below. 7. The political ecology of the world system. Capitalist destruction of ecosystems clearly emanates from the northern core, while peoples in the southern peripheries carry the bulk of the burden. World systems theory has consequently proved amenable to ecological deployment. The most original, highly idiosyncratic theory in this field has been developed by Alf Hornborg, who argues that modern technology is built on the appropriation of labor and land from the peripheries. All talk of progress or development or technical ingenuity simply masks the ecologically unequal exchange on which the northern machines are based. The first half of his classic, The Power of the Machine, Global Inequalities of Economy, Technology, and the Environment, lays out the theory. Its most recent iteration is Global Magic, Technologies of Appropriation from Ancient Rome to Wall Street of 2016. Hornborg is the leader here, but far from alone. To mention just one more book, J. Timmons Roberts and Bradley C. Parks, A Climate of Injustice, Global Inequality, North-South Politics, and Climate Policy. Much of it can be skipped, but chapters 4 and 5 offer a superb overview of the global injustices of climate change caused by the northern core suffered by the southern peripheries anchored in world systems theory. So you don't have to buy completely into world systems theory, but the north-south center periphery argument is one development question that you probably always have to have a good handle on. Number 8, energy and capitalism. The relation between energy, more particularly the fossil kind, and capitalism is a truly urgent topic. How to cut this nut? Several notable works have been published in recent years, among them Bruce Podobnik, Global Energy Shifts, Fostering Sustainability in a Turbulent Age, a promising attempt to situate the successive waves of expansion of fossil energy supplies in the pattern of long, and we've heard this before, Kondratiev waves of capitalist development, which end with a rather naively optimistic scenario for the future. Timothy Mitchell's Carbon Democracy, Political Power in the Age of Oil, highly acclaimed, thought-provoking account, how and why capitalist states shifted from coal to oil as the preeminent fossil fuel and the political consequences of this shift, particularly in the Middle East. Matt Huber of Syracuse, Lifeblood, Oil, Freedom, and the Forces of Capital, a brilliant Marxist Foucauldian analysis, Michel Foucault, analysis of how and why oil has become so central to life, including working class life in the United States, with applicability far beyond its borders. Andreas Malm's own Fossil Capital, The Rise of Steam Power and the Roots of Global Warming, an attempt to understand the historical origins of the climate crisis, focusing on the contradictions that prompted early British capitalism to abandon traditional energy sources, notably water, and turn to coal and steam, which I think is an important sense of history when it's get. Also look out for Materialism and the Critique of Energy, a volume edited by Brent Ryan Bellamy and Jeff Diamante. Climate politics, number 9. There are 1,000 facets of the climate crisis that call for Marxist analysis. Gratifyingly, the field seems to be undergoing rapid development. Some outstanding titles from the past decade, David Siplett, J. Timmons Roberts, John R. Kahn, Power in a Warming World, the New Global Politics of Climate Change, and the Remaking of Environmental Inequality. You can see that ecological titles sort of, you just move around the words a little bit, has certain syntactic consistency. A masterful analysis of the epical failure of the UN climate negotiations running up to COP21 in Paris. We're up to COP26, I think now. Or 27, draws on the theories of Antonio Gramsci, we all recall Gramsci, right? To explain international climate politics as a form of global class struggle. Christian Parenti, Tropic of Chaos, Climate Change and the New Geography of Violence, largely journalistic in nature, written by a leading Marxist climate scholar. This dispatch from some of the tropical frontiers of global warming paints a very gloomy picture of the conflicts likely to intensify as temperatures rise. That is, between poor and rich, but perhaps between different ethnic groups and communities. Scary and sobering. Carrie Marie Norgard, Living in Denial, Climate Change, Emotions, and Everyday Life. How can people continue to live as usual, even when having full knowledge about the climate crisis, indeed, even if they experience it firsthand? Why do they do so little? To understand this, a bit of psychology is necessary. This trailblazing study keeps its Marxism low-key, but through an analysis of the political and emotional economy of the petrostate of Norway, it very powerfully illuminates the social production of denial of the climate crisis, not as in explicitly denying the science a la Trump, but precisely as in living in denial. Also look out for Climate Leviathan, a political theory of our planetary future by Jeff Mann and Joel Wainwright. And judging from their antipode article with the same name, this will be an agenda-setting Marxist study of climate politics. Those of you interested in radical geography should read Antipode if you haven't already. That is, it's a journal and it has it's been published for decades. Philosophy of Nature, number 10, undoubtedly the most beautifully written book in the eco-Marxist canon, Kate Soper's What is Nature? Culture, Politics, and the Non-Human of 1995 is a treasure trove of rigorous philosophical observations on the relations between culture, society, gender, power, and nature. A book to read and reread and reread. Yes, it is. Eco-criticism, or the study of nature in literature, number 11, is an exciting and rapidly developing field of inquiry. A very fine work with affinities to Marxist approaches is Rob Nixon's Slow Violence and the Environmentalism of the Poor. Nixon reads several fiction and nonfiction writers. There is a field called eco-fiction also as well, you should know. Nixon reads several fiction and nonfiction writers from the global south and shows how they render the slow violence of environmental degradation visible. The Frankfurt School, number 12, where would we be without them? The classical thinkers of the Frankfurt School were intensely preoccupied with human domination of nature. It's the source of all sorts of social, political, and ecological ills. Apart from reading works such as the masterwork, The Dialectic of Enlightenment, through an eco-Marxist lens, one can now engage with a not insignificant secondary literature. Deborah Cook's Adorno on Nature, a close study of Adorno's ideas on nature and their potential uses for ecological theory. Andrew Bureau's edited Critical Ecologies, the Frankfurt School and Contemporary Environmental Crisis, an anthology with texts of uneven quality and varying views, including some piercing critiques of the ideas about environmental degradation found in Adorno and Horkheimer. And yes, unless you think that that's all a nonsense, there is a lot of new work being done on Adorno and Horkheimer. Stephen Vogel, Against Nature, the Concept of Nature in Critical Theory, an environmental philosopher, offers his quirky provocative reading of Western Marxism, issuing in the conclusion that nature does not exist other than as a reified category. We construct nature through our labor, and we should face up to it, which is an interesting point of view. Another in that same category, Simon Halewood's Alienation in Nature and Environmental Philosophy, a brilliant philosophical analysis of how and why we are alienated from nature, reaching conclusions opposite from Stephen Vogel. So, you get a sense of the range of philosophical conflict or antagonism. Reactionary environmentalism. There is far too much reactionary nationalist, xenophobic green through those swirling around for red greens to feel comfortable. Two hard-hitting critiques of this current are Ian Angus and Simon Butler. Too many people, population immigration and the environmental crisis. And in a more academic vein, John Holtgren's Border Walls Gone Green, Nature and Anti-Immigrant Politics in America of 2015. Number 14, Marxist biology. There's a very rich tradition of cutting-edge biological research rooted in Marxist dialectics, which sheds light not only on evolution and ecosystems and the workings of the biosphere as a whole, but on the Marxist method. And the modern classic is Richard Levins and Richard Lewontin, The Dialectical Biologist, pretty much standard reading for those who are scientists. The great master is, of course, Stephen Jay Gould, whose life work is summed up in the enormous 1,500 pages, wonderfully written, The Structure of Evolutionary Theory. And yes, it is not for the faint-hearted. Some other resources. Number 15, we're close to the end. The main house organ of ecological Marxism remains the journal Capitalism, Nature, Socialism, or CNS. Proponents of the Metabolic Rift School publish regularly in Monthly Review. Eco-Marxist stuff can be found in the pages of journal such as Historical Materialism and Capital and Class, while the blog Climate and Capitalism at climateandcapitalism.com fans the flames of eco-socialist debates with a tie to the climate movement. It's really quite good to read. And if you are intimidated by reading books, the journal articles are really quite good and very useful. So that's my little deal for today on dis and debt information. Please, and we may start one or more of these texts as we move forward, because as I've said, some of my dis and debts are shifting to support some of my research topics, even though yesterday we began the audio book, City of Quartz by the late Mike Davis. So we got through sort of the first 30 minutes, and there's many hours to go. So we may or may not continue doing that on Thursdays, just for people who want to listen to it. You can read it for yourself. It is a worthy text and does remind us of, particularly if you're from LA or if you've lived in LA, it's quite a useful text. Okay. Any comments, questions, brickbats? A tour of journal articles. Yes. Google Scholar is actually quite useful to get through some of these things, but and Google has all of this. Chris Hedges. Yes, we should read some Chris Hedges at some moment. If someone wants to bring forward some Chris Hedges, we should do that as well. Google Scholars is the subhead for Google. It's, like Google Image or whatever. Google Scholar is very useful because it allows you to track down PDF versions of articles. Much better than Google, and has no advertising. Well, maybe it does have it. I can't remember. It's useful though. Among there are many other sources to find all these things. Google is the first place to start. I usually start more safely in DuckDuckGo, but I urge you to look through other kinds of sources. Those journals that I mentioned before, Climate and Capitalism, Climate, Nature, and Socialism, all important. People should just, read those moderately regularly because they have a variety of positions and feature some interesting arguments. Those arguments exist elsewhere, of course, in Monthly Review, sometimes in New Left Review. Jacobin does occasional things that are worthwhile. So all of those things are there. And fortunately, we're staying ahead of fascism. So that's, unless there are comments, questions, brickbats. Hearing none, we will return to our regularly scheduled program a little bit early. Note that After Hours starts at 7 as usual. Eggplant pasta and pasta. Pasta. Not eggplant pasta, but pasta is coming up. I will rant on a variety of things. This has been a busy week for the forces of reaction and revisionism. And Twilight Zone is tonight, and I can't recall what's happening after Twilight Zone. I will go and find out, and then we will talk more about that. So anyway, 7 o'clock our wider cast on YouTube. So be here or be square.